Sometimes your machine might have an automatic buttonhole setting, or with your machine you might have gotten this handy dandy little buttonhole foot, which if you follow the instructions in your manual can be really nice. But some of you are rowing a machine where you don't have these accessories, or it doesn't have a buttonhole setting. So I'm going to teach you how to make a buttonhole if you don't have any of the stuff. Just think of it as preparation for the apocalypse, when all the computer technology goes out and you could be a valuable member of your society for being able to sew a buttonhole. A buttonhole is really just a slit that's a little bit wider than the button for the button to go through. And if you take a look at what a buttonhole is like, it really just has two edges of small zigzag stitching finished with bar tacks on both the top and bottom. I actually was showing you the wrong side. We're going to use a quarter today for a buttonhole. So the first thing you need to do is figure out the size of the button. You want to draw two lines on either side of the button. Again, I don't have a button in my office, so we're using this quarter as a button. You can practice with whatever you want. You don't want to make it really tight. You actually just want to be like a hair out beyond those two things, but these make the starting and end point of the button. And then you're going to draw a line right in the center. One thing that's super important for sewing good buttons is a good, stable foundation. If you have interfacing at home, you can take scraps and align them with interfacing. But if you don't run out to buy interfacing for your practice. So this is from one of those reusable bags, and it's pretty thick and sturdy and allow you to practice a lot of times. You're probably not going to get this right on your first time. That's okay. Just practice it over and over and over. It's kind of one of those things that once it clicks really well. My students at school usually had to practice. I said, like, if you've done anything less than 10 times, you don't get a complaint yet, because it just takes a little while to get used to it.
You were suggesting they practice on interfacing?
Sorry, no, I'll clarify that a little bit more. Whatever you can practice on a scrap of fabric, but your fabric needs to have a lot of structure. So if you have a scrap of fabric, you should have interfacing in between it. This, because it's so stiff, can take the place of interfacing. So you can either practice right on one of these non-wovens, and you'll see I have 2 layers here, or you could put this in between fabric.
So 2 scraps of fabric with interfacing.
Yes. Yeah. The interfacing is the important part. Yeah. Not just folded over fabric. No. Folded over fabric with something in it. If you don't have this, even a piece of printer paper in between your folded over fabric would give you the stability.
Okay.
When you do a button on a project, you will want to have real interfacing, but for practicing, for getting the hang of it, for getting your sample to put on your portfolio, this is okay. So I've drawn the start and finish of my buttonhole. If you have a clear foot, that's going to help you because you can see this, but if you don't, it's okay. I'm also using a different color bobbin and upper thread just so you can see, because the first thing you want to do is you actually want to come up to your attention, and I know I said don't touch this a lot, but you actually want to turn it down a little bit. And the reason that is, you actually want the lower thread to pull the upper thread kind of to the back of the fabric. The next thing you want to do is you want to come over and figure out how you sew a zigzag stitch. So for me, that is selecting zigzag is number 3 and my stitch selector, so I changed that to the zigzag. Then we want to try and find a narrow, short zigzag stitch. So the way that I make it narrow is on my stitch width dial. So I'm actually, you got to play around with this until you find the one that's about right for you. Mine wound up, I think, being about 1, but we'll sew it here and see. And the stitch length, mine was all the way beneath 1, but not yet 0. If your stitch length is set to 0, you won't move at all, which will actually become important later on. But for now, you need to move it some. So start at 1 and move down if that is the case. The next thing you do, you might want to unthread this for a bit, but you want to see where the needle is going to punch down because that shows you where you orient. So I am noticing that and you want your needle to come down just on the side of this line. It doesn't matter whether you come down the right side or the left side first, but you want to hit it just to the side of that. I'm finding that if I position this, this middle line just a little hair past center on my foot, I am zigzagging right beside it. Actually, I've also learned that I don't want a 1 for my stitch width. I want something more like a 2. Yeah, that's pretty good. So when I have that down, I will thread again, and then I will actually sew that. So you start with the top bar centered into this little window on the presser foot, and this lined up in alignment where it needs to be so that your stitch will hit just to the side of this line. You don't want to hit on the center line because we need spaces in between the 2 stitches. Okay, we're going to sew down until we get to this bottom point. When we stop, we're going to actually raise up the foot, and then we're going to turn this around. So the way we started with this in the window, we want to go up here and start with this in the window. I actually didn't start soon enough, but we'll see if it still works out. Again, this is why you need to practice a couple times to get the feel of what works best for your machine. So now we're going to zigzag down the other side, but you want a space in between those two. If you don't have a space in between those stitches, you won't be able to cut a space for the buttonhole. And then if you were like me and you got a little short, you can actually come back and make that extend to the top. Okay, now you are going to lift up your needle again.
Is that an appropriate amount of space, or do you wish it was a little bit
That is okay.
bigger?
You might want it a little bit bigger. This is going to take a real... Yeah, I'm going to have to be really careful when slicing this open.
Okay.
Okay, for this next step, I leave the threads long because I'm going to have you pull them all to the back. Also, like if you're uneven and it's a little bit beyond here, you could just take that out. We're going to sew the bar tacks. So the bar tacks are a wide zigzag on a 0 stitch length. So I'm coming back up here to my stitch width selector, and I'm going as wide as possible. And then I'm going down to a 0. And again, I'm going to unthread my needle because I want to see where this hits down. So I'm going to guess, and again put that line of ink in the window. And I want to see that it's covering both edges. And actually mine's a little bit wide, so I am going to turn my width down to 4 and see. Actually want to... Ideal is when it's just hitting the 2 sides of the line, if that makes sense. So I noticed again my stem is a little past center, and then my ink is centered right in that hole on my presser foot. Gonna rethread.
So you're sewing the whole line, or just to kind of close up the
close
hole?
up. You're sewing. It's called a bar tack, and you're tacking off the 2 ends of your zigzag stitch.
So it needs to go a little bit beyond.
Yes, a little bit beyond
The 2 vertical lines.
So you're gonna sew a lot, just back and forth. And again, it won't move because your stitch length is 0.
I get it.
So then again, leave threads here. Maybe I was a little overzealous on that one.
It's stitch length 0 because you didn't want it to move anywhere,
Right.
because you're just trying to add
Tack
a bunch of
off those
thread
lines.
and add strength to that spot.
Yes.
I'm a slow learner, folks.
And so... So I actually think I did a better job with that one than this one. This one I'm not loving because my one line doesn't go back up to it, but then I just practice a little bit more. Okay, when you're here, you kind of tug on the bobbin thread to get everything pulled to the back, and then it's just good practice to tie all these things off before snipping the thread if you can. That way, if it starts to come unraveled, it doesn't start undoing your buttonhole. So I just honestly am arbitrarily picking some threads.
When you say pull it to the back, which side is the back? The other side?
The back is the side that the bobbin's sewed on, and in your garment, it would be the inside of the garment. So, like if you're sewing a shirt, it's gonna be the inside of the placket. It's the side that is not meant to be on the side that is showing, because yeah, you might get like a knot there. So I've tied it off. If you had like fingernail polish or something too, that would just kind of stabilize it. So how I'm pulling these to the back is I'm taking advantage of the fact that they're interlooped, and when you pull on the green one, you're pulling a loop of the upper thread, and so if you get in the middle of that loop and pull it back, that pulls it back.
I think we're just having a hard time seeing the different, or I'm having a hard time seeing the difference between green and yellow.
I picked the two most brilliant colors out of my thread box, and turns out it was not. They're kind of the same looking. Okay, so once they're pulled to the back, tie them off. And then snip your threads. Oh, well, I didn't pull these to the back, but I'm just going to trust that we've got enough tied off that if I snip these, it's not going to unravel. Okay, your last step is you're going to want to take a seam ripper and you're going to insert it in here right inside that bar tack, and you're going to carefully seam rip to center. Then you're going to do it from the other side. A lot of times you are tempted to just make it one motion and seam rip all the way through, but I've seen a lot of people go through their bar tack at the other end and then it doesn't work. So I always say go from the center to the middle.
Better safe than sorry, or you have to practice more.
And then test to see that your button fits through. And if it doesn't, you know that you have to make them a little bit wider.
Nice.
Yeah. So honestly, just practice a bunch of times until you get one or two that you're really, really happy with. Upload them to standard, I don't know which number, but for closures, circling the ones that you think are your ideal or best ones. And that's good.
That's it. Happy buttonhole making, everyone.
Happy buttonhole making.